What's up, Pod Pals? We are here for another podcast audit on Podcasting Business School. And I've got my friend Tom Fox from the Compliance Podcast Network. And this guy has his schedule is full, lots of shows. He's really deep into the podcasting space. So I'm really excited to dive in and just brainstorm. This will be a new conversation that we haven't had before as far as the podcast audits go. So Tom, welcome to the show. First and foremost, it's great to have you, man.
Adam, thanks so much. Greatly looking forward to this.
Okay, so you've got the Compliance Podcast Network. Break this down for us a little bit. Like, tell us what made you start it? What is it all made up of? What's the goal of the network?
Sure. So I started podcasting in 2012, and I practice law in a very niche area called compliance. And in 2016, I got the idea that if we could create one network or resource for all compliance practitioners for podcasting, it would be a great boon. So there's a couple of nonprofits and a couple of for-profit organizations. So I went around to all of them and pitched to them, let's start this network. We'll pool our podcasts. If there's advertising revenue, we'll share that. And I could get zero interest. So I basically said, the heck with it, I'll just start it myself. And so I did, and I did it for a couple of years. In 2019, I decided to fully commit to it, stop practicing law, see if I could make a living podcasting. I bought all the cool toys, built out this huge infrastructure. And at the end of the year, I determined I could not make a living podcasting. So I moved it back into a hobby status. And then what happened in 2020 was they shut the country down on about March 15. And on May 15, I got a call literally from every product provider in my space. And it was the same call. How long to get on your network? Because in the compliance world, almost all marketing was through trade shows, conferences, sort of breakfast roundtables, group meetings, those sorts of things. And of course, that was not available. And by then, I had the largest social media presence in compliance. I had the only podcast network. And because of the work I'd done in 2019, when I was asked that question, my answer was 24 hours. Because basically all I needed was a name and set up an RSS feed. And so I went literally from $5,000 a month in income to $35,000 a month in income in 1 month. And it stayed that way the rest of the year. And then since that time, I've worked to build out and make more formal what I kind of stumbled into in 2020. Although one of my favorite phrases is when preparation meets opportunity, luck occurs. So if I hadn't done that work and lost all that money in 2019, I wouldn't have been ready in 2020. So now I'm just trying to build this network out and make it as big as I can in the compliance world.
So what is the ideal, member of your network look like? Because, we may have people listening in that could be a great fit, or people that know people, obviously. Like, who is the exact ideal fit that they need to come and be in my network?
So my network is a B2B network, and it is compliance. It has three general kind of groups working in it. One is in-house corporate types, either compliance officers, general counsel types, other corporate executives. Two are legal types, both in-house and outside, private practice lawyers. And the third are sort of business executives outside the compliance realm who recognize this as a part of the work they need to do, so they need to keep abreast of it. The audience is about 46% US, so I have pretty good coverage around the world. It's a topic that literally has worldwide business appeal. So anyone that wants to talk about compliance in any way, shape, or form, I've got the place for you. If you want to talk about B2B issues, leadership, business ethics, risk management, all of these topics, there's a place for you. It can be Sherlock Holmes in compliance. It can be Shakespeare in compliance. It can be the daily compliance news. It could be great women in compliance. It can be the fight against human trafficking. It can be insider trading and everything in between. I've got a podcast on all of those. That's why I named them. And you can talk about really anything you want.
Wow. So Obviously, when you look at a podcast network, people are looking to be a part of something that makes it easier to grow, easier to monetize. Where are we at with like sponsorship opportunities and things like that? Is that happening? Is that something that you're looking to grow? Where do we stand on that?
So in sponsorship opportunities, the answer for me is always yes. For the individual podcast host, it may be a little different because most of the people in my podcast are trying to increase their individual brand awareness or become a thought leader in some form of compliance. And of
Right.
course, the podcast, as you know, the podcast format is uniquely suited for that. And then the third group is the group that wants to meet other people in the compliance space. Because as I tell people, if you call up and say, "Hey, I'm Tom Fox, I'd like to talk to you," you may or may not get a response. If you mail me and say, "Hey, I'm Tom Fox, I have a podcast and I want you to talk about yourself," you will get 100% response. So it's a great way to meet people.
Yeah, that is completely and 100% true. It's gets you right through the gatekeeper, and that's always amazed me. But it's like one of the secret superpowers of podcasting. A lot of people don't realize. Um, Now, with your network, obviously, we're looking to grow it. So, like, what has worked so far as scooping people up? So I've got a few different ideas that we could explore, but what's already working with like, all right, we're scooping people up out of these areas, this type of marketing or this type of networking that's really pulling the right people into my world. So let's start there, and then we can kind of kick around some ideas.
So for the network, it's hard to say on individual topics because my number one podcast of all time was the following: branding lessons from Count Dracula. Who knew that the vampire world and compliance intersected so closely? I sure didn't. But it's just individual topics that resonate or don't resonate with an audience. And the thing that is the most, I would say, is the most important is consistent quality content. If you have a consistent quality content, people are going to tune in, even if the individual subject matter may not be their top interest. If it's interesting within a storytelling context, they're going to listen. And then the flip side is the people who have created the biggest podcast within the network are those who have used the podcast as one form of their basically individual content marketing. They may use it to help write a book. They may use it to write blogs or other social media. They may use it to try to expand two women have great women in compliance. So they've created a woman's group, a LinkedIn group for compliance professionals. So if you use it as a tool, you can grow your individual podcast and make it more valuable, obviously within the network.
So I'm assuming you're probably doing some social media stuff on LinkedIn. That seems like a no-brainer, like home run. People are on LinkedIn in this space. They're looking to do business. Have you explored Clubhouse at all? There are lots and lots and lots of legal professionals and legal conversations happening. So I feel like there may be like a tangential connection there with people that may be interested in your shows or being on your network. Have you dove into Clubhouse yet with your own efforts?
I looked at it when it first came out, and at that point, I really didn't want to do a live show. I was afraid I would gravitate to sort of a daily radio show. I have two daily podcasts, and I didn't want to pick up a third. But here's the problem I have with that. It's nothing related to Clubhouse. I moved out to the country about 9 months ago, and I have terrible internet. And I've been able to overcome that in the podcast world by recording on platforms that record directly off the individual computer feed. So the platforms I use would record you off your computer and me off mine. So it's not going up to the cloud and mixing. I don't have that option available on a live stream such as Clubhouse.
Yeah. Well, what I was thinking about that if you can get the audio potentially figured out, because it's an audio. I wasn't necessarily thinking about a live show, but just the networking on there. Like I think a lot of potential listeners and a lot of potential people that may want to be in your network are in there having conversations where like what I do is I jump into rooms on podcasting growth, podcast monetization, podcast launch. and I'm just in the conversation there. I'm not, these aren't shows. They're just Clubhouse conversations. But what I'm doing is I'm pulling a lot of people into my world, because I go in there and I jump up on stage and I just teach a little bit, kind of impromptu, and they're following me to wherever I go. And I mean, that's something that I would take a peek at. I think you could do pretty darn well with it, just because I see a lot of people that would be interested in what you're doing on that platform. And it's audio only, so it's internet wise. If you can, if you have enough juice to do like FaceTime conversations or something like that, you should be able to hack it out with your internet. But that's just one thing that kind of popped up. As far as another attraction point for a podcasting network is being able to crank some downloads. Are you guys doing any like marketing on podcast player ads or anything like that that has been beneficial for growing the individual shows or the overall network?
So the only marketing I've done, I do a special series that's sort of not compliance related every other month. So I did a series on 9/11. I'm doing a series now on the science of Star Wars. I did a series on Lyme disease just to try to improve my storytelling. And I've advertised those series and they've done pretty well. The key there is if it breaks out into a broader audience, within the compliance community, I'm fairly constrained in terms of it is a niche audience. But if I can break out into a broader audience, I do see pretty tremendous growth. But those are the only areas I've really advertised.
Are you advertising through like Facebook and Instagram ads, or what modalities are you using to advertise?
So Facebook, LinkedIn, I usually buy some. Can I name some of the places I go?
Yeah,
Podfest Global. I'm a big fan of Chris and what he's doing, so
yeah.
I advertise on his newsletter. Evo Terra with podcast pontifications. I advertise on his site, and so the places where people go for information on podcast series, I try to advertise there.
Nice. And I'll send you a few of my favorite, I call them fishing holes, but like something like overcast.fm, like little, podcast player apps that obviously we can't run ads on Apple, but every other podcast player we can run ads on, whether they're audio or banner ads. And I've been really successful at helping people double, triple, 10x their download numbers just by running these audio ads. Like I don't do any Facebook or any Instagram. I don't give them any of my money, because this is way more effective. Where, like to me, I view a Facebook ad as I may or may not be marketing to people that even know what a podcast is. And then I got to get them off that platform onto a different platform to listen to my show. So if I advertise on a podcast player, they're already on an app listening to a podcast, and we can pick the category so that they're listening to shows like the show that I'm advertising to them. So it's a double fit, and they just click on it, and all those apps are tracking how many people saw your banner or your ad, how many people tapped on it, and then how many people actually hit the subscribe button. So I freaking love it. So I'll send you some information on where I'm doing that, and I think that if you can just get people cranking some numbers and they're happy and they're seeing a result, like then they're going to keep showing up for your network, and that grows the whole thing. And that's when certain opportunities arise like that, that'll get everybody fired up. So that's definitely one thing that I would recommend exploring, that I think that you could do pretty darn well with, and everybody would benefit from. Now with your network, is it released in one RSS feed, or is it multiple RSS feeds? Because sometimes people have like a network, but it's just one RSS feed and they're just released kind of on different days, or they have each individual show has its own RSS. How are you guys set up?
So each show has its own RSS feed. I post on Megaphone. I found that to be a very user-friendly platform, and it's cost-effective for multiple shows. I also have a WordPress site that they're also posted, and then all of the places, the usual suspects that you just named, as well as a few more in the legal world where I can post, because they're tangentially legally focused podcast. I can post on there, although it's not an RSS feed. I have to actually embed the code in, so I don't get counted on any of the major platforms. So that's a little bit of a pain.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you got your hands full. So you said you have 90 shows now in the like 90 individual RSS feeds going.
Yes,
That's impressive. That's a lot, man. And how many of those shows are you actually one of the hosts?
40.
Oh, that's awesome. So how do you map that out? Because that's something like you said one of the shows is daily. Like how are all the other shows weekly? What's that look like? This is very
Sure.
interesting to
So
me.
actually, I have two daily. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 weekly. I have half a dozen biweekly. It's maybe 10 weekly, half a dozen biweekly, and the rest are periodics, 2 to 3 times a month whenever I can chase somebody down on that subject matter. And then how I do it is I started out, of course, I didn't start with those numbers. So every day I know which podcasts are being released. So it's kind of in my head of that podcast on that day. And so I know that. And hopefully I'm not going to foul that up. But the biggest thing for me was hiring a virtual assistant to do the social media outreach because I'm a huge believer in Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook. And I hit those dozens of times a day with as many social media assets as I can for each
Yep.
podcast. So I used to spend literally 4 hours a day doing that. And I finally wised up and hired a virtual assistant who does that. And she's fabulous. But we hit social media hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And what kind of assets are doing the best for you right now on social media? Like with me, like any video stuff does pretty darn well, but like are you posting audiograms, like little snippet quote cards? What seems to be getting the best pull for you?
So that I can't give the answer because I use all of those. I use videograms if it's a video pod, audiograms on all podcasts, the quote snippets as well. And so the only insight I've gotten because she looks at the numbers was the engagement on the weekends was 5 to 10x the engagement on the weekdays, which really surprised me. And she looked at it for literally 4 months and she said, Tom, you're posting 5 tweets on the weekend. You're posting 25 on a weekday. Why don't you increase the weekends to 25 each? And she was absolutely right.
Yeah. Like to me, I feel like I make the assumption that people are trying to get out of work or get a break from work, so they're engaging with my social media stuff. But maybe they're just trying to get away from their family after being on lockdown or something like that. So one other idea I had for you, as far as like, I kind of look at like what's worked for my brand and brand growth and getting the right people into my world. And one of the best moves I ever made was creating my bi-weekly networking event that I call the Pod Pal Zoom Party, where I invite my listeners or anybody, but most of them are my listeners and they're podcasters and they come on the show and we do, have 12, 15, 20, 25 podcasters on there and we create some content together. I teach a little bit and then we all get to have kind of an open discussion about what I'm teaching on. But I think you could easily turn one of your shows into something where you're inviting your ideal members of your network to, they're kind of like the podcast curious people in compliance, and you're inviting them in to kind of like almost like a starter kit conversation, like an appetizer to the meal of what you actually provide. And maybe you do this once a month and you bring them in and you create content. And that's a show. That's like, because then if people are you got so many shows, I'm sure there's one of them that like, this is a good fit for that, where those types of people are also listening in. So then you got expert positioning in the earbuds as well. And like I release these every other week and people come into my world. They're already, if they've been listening to my show and hearing that, they're already warmed up to how I coach, how I speak, what I'm an expert in. And a lot of those people, it just makes the whole conversion process from that being a community member to be an actual paying client. It makes it, in my opinion, a lot easier. So that's something I think it's easy content. You already have plenty of space for content. We're not lacking on that. But it's pulling the exact right person that you want to pull into your world that would be a great fit for your network, because they're curious about what would it take to launch a compliance show, or what maybe like, I do these things called podcast launch think tanks, where it's kind of like that sort of a vibe, like what's keeping you from launching your show right now. And you're just kind of getting them over the hump. And then you kind of bring them in. There's a follow-up conversation about what it would look like to be a part of your network. So any thoughts on that?
Do you do that on Zoom?
I do it on Zoom. Yep. So yeah, we do.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea. Let me pick up on something you said there because I know most of the people listening to this have already heard this, but I want to repeat it because of the way you did it. You said, and you went like this, you said, I'm in their earbuds. And I can't emphasize enough the psychological power of talking to someone in the podcast format. And I have had more people at conferences come up to me and say, I recognize your voice. I hear your voice every morning on the
Yeah.
news. And there really is something to that, that even more than a video, or in my world, the written word is king still as a lawyer. But having that in you being in their earbud really does mean something, and you can create content and deliver it in a way that the podcast format is like no other. So I just wanted to emphasize that because you hit it right on the head. You're in their
Well,
earbud.
yeah, as an expert too. And the thing is, like, I kind of cut my teeth in the health and weight loss space. And when people were ready to invest in health and weight loss, I was top of mind. That helped me stand out in a very crowded area. And, in what I do now, it's a little less crowded, but same thing. People hear me doing podcast audits like this every single Friday. Every other week, they hear me do a Pod Pal Zoom party. Many of them come in and start to actually interact and create content with me like we're doing here. So, like, down the road, if they're looking to grow their show, to launch a show, to monetize a show, I'm top of mind because they've heard me dozens and dozens of times, and then a lot of them have actually interacted with me in this space. So I think you could crush it with that sort of a format, and it's really, finding, you pull them off your email list. It's like getting them off the sidelines and into the game to where they're not. In Indiana, we call them like looky-loos. When you sell your house and your neighbors all come and they just want to look through all your crap. Those are the looky-loos. We're not talking about those people. We're talking about the people that actually are curious and they just need that extra little invite to go, yeah, I'm all right, coach. I'm ready to get in the game. And that gives them a reason to come and interact with you. And it's free, and it's creating content for the show. They may already listen to the show, so that's kind of cool. And so yeah, I would definitely explore that idea, and I think you could do pretty darn well with it.
So yeah, because I could have 5 people that have come on the network because of me who've created great shows, and they'd love to come on and talk about that.
Yep.
So that's a great idea.
Yep. Well, cool, Tom. I've enjoyed our little pod chat here today, and I think that what you're doing is awesome. You're obviously very busy. You obviously love podcasting, which I love talking to people that love podcasting as much as I do, because it's such a transformative space, and you meet so many cool people, and so many connections and collaborations come out of it. So let's say people want to get a hold of you. They want to dive into your world. They want to check out your show. They want to check out your network. What's the best direction that we can send them in?
So if you want to check out my network, it's the Compliance Podcast Network, www.compliancepodcastnetwork.net. If you want to give me a shout, you can call me at 832-744-0264. If you want to email me, you can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. I'd love to continue this conversation, whether it's about podcasting, compliance, or really anything else.
All right. Pod Pals, reach out, give Tom a shout. This is a dude that's really making some moves in the space, and he's helping a lot of people get their message out there, which I think is super cool. If you guys want to come on for a podcast audit, go ahead on the main website, podcastingbusiness.school. And with that, I'll sign off, wishing you all health, happiness, and many downloads. We will see you next time.